So I got a comment on one of my recent videos. Normally I wouldn't make a video about comments, but it leads into a larger issue that I wanted to talk about. Now there's a lot of context involved with this, so please bear with me. First of all, the comment reads, "Hey, I like your content, but I'm gonna have to unsub after seeing how you defended D&D making the orcs woke. Shake my head, this is why women should be gatekept from geek hobbies." This is referring to a few comments I made on Twitter a few months ago. However, if I may, they're being taken out of context. Back in June, Dungeons & Dragons announced that they would be changing up their orcs. For a while now, there's been this weird push of saying that orcs and other evil races represent minorities and are racist in their depictions.
Much of the recent conversation on orcs points out that characterizing a whole species in your game as ugly, warlike, and malevolent might be harmful to real-world groups regularly mischaracterized as ugly, warlike, and malevolent.
That video from Extra Credits is a few years old by now, but it did a good job of summing up the discourse, although I personally don't agree with that assessment. I think there's a difference between hating evil bloodthirsty monsters and hating another human being just because of the way they look. And if people are comparing monsters to average humans, then maybe they're the problem. Just a thought. But just like other companies like Disney, Wizards of the Coast have also been taking their criticisms to heart, to the point where, not unlike Disney, they're cultivating a negative relationship with their fans. But anyway, thanks to this backlash, they decided to expand on the orcs. I guess in an attempt to dispel the racism allegations by giving orcs more options. Now they've added in this Western aesthetic, where they're basically cowboys, and naturally people had opinions about it. Now personally, I don't have a problem with having evil races, or races that are just the bad guys. Whether it's traditional fantasy like orcs and goblins, or if they're a race of evil aliens like the Gordanians or the Chitauri. Sometimes bad guys are just bad guys, you know? That being said, I'm not against having traditional bad guys be fleshed out more, or even turned into heroes. Like in comic books, the Red Lantern Corps are usually portrayed as villains. However, in Green Lantern the animated series, they had a Red Lantern who switches sides and becomes a hero, and he ended up being one of the best characters in that show, in my opinion. So I do think it can work. But getting back to D&D, I don't think it's necessary to change the orcs, but I do think it can work under certain circumstances. Like in a vacuum, I actually think cowboy orcs could be really interesting. I never really talk about this on my channel, but I'm actually a pretty big fan of westerns. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of my favorite movies. I also think western can be pretty underrated. I realize trends come and go, and western was way more popular in the past, but I think there's a lot of potential with the genre, especially if you mix it with other genres like science fiction or fantasy, or horror. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmares was awesome. That could be really cool to explore, but admittedly I don't think D&D is necessarily the place for that. But what's cool about Dungeons & Dragons is that you basically just play it however you want. Like if you want to explore a western setting while playing a D&D campaign, you totally can. The only actual limitations to the game are just whatever your group decides. But obviously it is a drastic change, and basically they're doing it because they felt like they were pressured to, instead of it being a more organic decision. And I can definitely see why people wouldn't vibe with it. And naturally, since it's Twitter, people let their opinions be known. And admittedly, I didn't really agree with some of their takes. And that was actually what I was commenting on back in June. You see, people were saying that the orcs had been made girly now that they were cowboys. So my initial tweet was, not that I'm agreeing to the change, but what exactly about cowboy/western is sissy? So this tweet was actually a reply to a reply. The original tweet said, "Holy crap, at Wizards of the Coast has gone out of its way to make D&D lame. Hashtag DN done." Yes, very clever. And then comparing orcs now to orcs then. So a couple things. First of all, westerns are not lame. Westerns are cool. Thank you very much. And secondly, that's not actually an orc, that's a goblin. This comes from Dungeons & Dragons Assault on Raven's Ruin from 1992, and the back of it is talking about how goblins are the monsters you have to deal with, not orcs. Multiple people pointed this out, but I haven't seen any kind of correction from the original account. I'm sure it was just a mistake, it happens to everyone, but still, this post has like 4,000 likes. And it's not actually accurate to the game. And there are a lot of people who just went along with it, including the account that I was initially replying to. This tweet said, "What could be a more apt example of the feminization of traditionally boys-catered media than this? Again, I understand not vibing with the change, but at the same time, what exactly about this is girly or feminized? It's literally just a bunch of orcs and a scouting party and being cowboys and falconeers." The tweet goes on to take more shots at westerns. Seriously, seriously, what is their problem with cowboys? Haters, all of them. He then goes on to make some pretty weird statements about women's interests. He basically says we only like romance and slice of life, while not liking adventure or weapons. While I don't think this update is going to actually attract more girls to D&D, I have trouble following basically everything this guy is saying. He's basically acting like girls are only interested in romance and slice of life and no other genre, especially adventure, which is pretty silly. There's lots of shoujo and girl-related media that's all about adventure, like for example Magic Knight Rayearth, an isekai anime about these girls who get transported to a medieval world where they get cool swords and abilities and go on adventures. There's even mechs. Basically, this anime had everything, and it was heavily inspired by RPGs, and it was created by Clamp, which is an all-female manga team, and adventure is a huge aspect in shoujo manga and anime. There's also Cardcaptor Sakura or Yona of the Dawn, but even classic western shows, My Little Pony, Rainbow Bright, Winx Club, Miraculous Ladybug, women like action and adventure too. Plus, I like westerns, which are not sissy. Seriously, I don't think these guys even know what girly is. One guy compared these cowboy orcs to Lisa Frank, which looks like this. How on earth do these two have similar aesthetics at all? I'm just saying. Also, at the end of the day, this is still Dungeons and Dragons, so people can still play however they want. Technically, if you want to still play with the classic idea of orcs, you can. And frankly, I don't see how that position is woke. But of course, people are always free to disagree with me. One of the reasons why I always end my videos by saying that's just my opinion is because people are absolutely entitled to think whatever they want, and they're free to agree or disagree with me however they please. I'm just some girl sitting in my house talking to a microphone. It's not like I have any control over what companies do. And if you do hate westerns for whatever reason, you're totally entitled to that opinion, but I will fight you on it. I think this animosity is a response to the activist culture that's been going on for the last 10 years or so. For a long time, companies have been putting out some pretty subpar material, but claiming that it was for the sake of women and minorities. And if you don't like it, it's probably because you're a bigot. But constantly guilting people just caused a lot of resentment. Plus, they were being pretty nitpicky. Like when Anita Sarkeesian said that everything was problematic.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
It led to these concepts being way overused to the point where people don't really take them seriously anymore. And it's still going on today. Sweet Baby Inc. has made a name for itself for all the wrong reasons, being openly hostile to companies and their customer base. And even recently, some more evidence surfaced that they had some weird goals. When listing why they were here, they included to burn the video game industry to the ground. And truthfully, they're more focused on this goal than actually creating good products, because they're so caught up in their own messages that that's all they really care about over storytelling, to the point where really they're just making propaganda instead of actual stories. This has led to people being overly sensitive to the point where they're shifting to the opposite extreme. Now we're seeing people avoid any piece of media that has a female or a person of color as the protagonist. And there's a pretty thriving cancel culture. People are making blacklists of anything they think contains even a hint of DEI, digging into people's past to see if they have any association with Sweet Baby Inc., or shunning anyone who doesn't use the right talking points. There are games on this list that you wouldn't even expect, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. It even ends with them saying they're glad the game underperformed. Thanks to this witch hunt, they are actively pulling for games to fail. I can understand games like Dustborn, which was literally encouraging bullying, but there's a big difference between that and Final Fantasy VII. This whole thing feels like horseshoe theory. It's this toxic us versus them mentality, and people are just jumping to conclusions. There was a drama this week surrounding a game called Ghost of Yotei, the sequel to the beloved game Ghost of Tsushima. This game has a female protagonist and takes place hundreds of years after Tsushima did. There were those who were disappointed that we didn't get to follow the original protagonist anymore, but there were also those who were disappointed simply because we were now following a woman, and it got pretty ugly. Like one guy saying, "We're playing as a woman in the sequel," with a gif of Homelander looking disgusted. Or this other guy who goes, "Ghost of Tsushima sequel stars a Japanese woman samurai warrior because of course it does. They can't help themselves until every franchise that was built on masculinity is replaced by women. So sick of the forced girl boss narrative, man." First of all we have to go off of is this announcement trailer, and it didn't really give us much of the narrative. Isn't it a little early to decide if the game's gonna be a disaster? But secondly, a lot of franchises have different characters for their installments. What's the big deal? Plus, Tsushima had a lot of female characters who were really cool. And there are many legends about female samurai. There were Bushi warriors called the Onamusha. I mean, they're just playing into the preconceived notions of corpos and journos at this point. Then they started digging through anyone involved in this game, and found out that the main character's actress is a leftist, and they dug through her Twitter to find any dirt on her. Look, I'm gonna be upfront, I genuinely don't care about an actor's politics. I don't care if Bryan Cranston and Mark Ruffalo are liberals, or if Dwayne Johnson and Tim Allen are conservatives. As long as they put on a good performance, then they did their job as actors. I'm not saying I agree with her using a blockchain on Twitter, or that the game will definitely be as good as Tsushima was. I'm just saying that she's not the one writing the game. I mean, Breaking Bad was good, and Bryan Cranston is a pretty outspoken leftist. It didn't affect the show. And the same is true for a lot of stuff. It's called separating the art from the artist. And again, we only have a very short announcement trailer. We have no idea how she performed this character. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it'll suck. We just have to wait and see. I'm not telling anyone to support this game or throw your money at it. Ultimately, it's your time and money, and you get to choose what you do with it. I know people get frustrated with the whole wait and see thing, but Sucker Punch did such a good job with Ghost of Tsushima that they were made ambassadors to the island itself. That has to count for something. Also, looking through people's tweets to find something you can use against them is something that journalists and SJWs do. I'm just saying.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
I'm just sick of this culture war, and you have to agree on everything, otherwise you're woke or anti-woke. I just think entertainment should speak for itself, instead of having to enforce messages into it, or people automatically assume something because of who's behind it. And if it is bad, we'll all know. Just look at Concord, it didn't even last a month. This is why I say I don't like the culture war. But that's my opinion. And it's totally okay if you don't agree with me. But feel free to leave your thoughts, I always love hearing from you guys. But thank you, genuinely, for listening to me ranting. I'll be back to talking about regular stuff later, but in the meantime, shout out to the members. Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Spam, Lucas Geis, Jay Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Crimson Phantom, Dakari the Professor, Owen Wildish, Jin the Goblin, Caleb Nelson, Todd McCaffrey, Killer Bomb, Datadyne Executive, and Omni Fear. Thank you all so much for your support. If you would like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. And if you enjoyed this content, you can leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. I'd really appreciate the support. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.